Hello, patrons, and welcome back, finally, to a special bonus Patron-only episode of This Film Is Lit. It's been a while, for a number of reasons, but we won't go into any of that. We watched the thing that everybody has watched. You've clicked on this because you saw the title of the episode. We watched Tiger King, and we're going to talk about it because we have some thoughts on it, and maybe some thoughts that aren't super well voiced. I don't know. Some of them are. Some of them I think aren't.
I've been seeing more
of this
things that are in line with our thoughts.
Okay, so there's just a lot of memeing that.
The memeing,
right? It's out of control. Yeah. But in general, the stuff that I've seen has not. I felt like I've had a very contrary opinion about the documentary in general to a lot of people, at least that I've seen online. But I could be mistaken about that. Maybe it's just sort of I'm only seeing like one side or whatever.
I'm definitely seeing more of the opposite to us side, but I'm like lately the past couple of days I've been seeing a ramp up in like stuff that I'm like I agree with that.
Gotcha.
So
all right, so we'll stop being sort of
vague
and get into the specific thing. We kind of have four main topics we're going to hit, but first we're going to start with sort of a general review and discussion. And as everybody has said, it is a wild, entertaining and horrifying 7 episodes of a...
It's a cliche, but it really is like the definition of like a train wreck or a car wreck that you just like, it's horrible, but you can't tear your eyes away from it.
Yeah. It is, I completely see why it has captured the minds and imaginations of, millions and millions of viewers, because it is, it's well crafted in the sense that it's, they know how to present, the filmmakers know how to present the story in a very compelling way, which we'll get into some of that eventually, but it's also just a very interesting story. Like, it's obviously a very, like, wild tale. Because, barring some of the stuff we'll talk about, most of the stuff the stuff that happens in the documentary, obviously the stuff did happen. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Now, some of it, the way it's presented, we'll talk about whether or not, certain elements of the presentation, that people seem to be taking at face value, in my opinion, that I think probably shouldn't be, but or potentially shouldn't be. I do think it is a clearly like just insane series of events that took place that they were able to document, and the fact that they did have footage of like everything that happened is really wild and really rare. One thing I will say that I thought was interesting, and I've talked about this a little bit. We've talked about this a little bit. I thought it was wild. So overall review, like, it's entertaining. I don't know if I will say this. I don't know if I recommend watching it, and we'll get into that. I would say it's already exists. Everybody's already seen it. You've probably already seen it, or you haven't at this point, or decided, or if you're somebody who hasn't watched it, you haven't watched it for specific reasons, and me saying anything else, like, you already have your reasons for not watching it, and I might agree with you. And we'll get into some of that, but I will say that it is wild to me how sort of cliche of a documentary it is in the presentation of it. It's so if anybody's listened to Serial or watched most true crime dramas of the last 6 years, everything since Serial and right around Serial, this is exactly that.
Yeah, they're doing nothing new with
There's
the format.
nothing new or interesting with the format or the presentation, which is interesting. And it's because it's a presentation style that works. Yeah. People obviously aren't tired of it. But it's also interesting to me because it's a presentation and a style that has been thoroughly critiqued through satire and stuff. Yes. Like we've talked about we haven't talked about it on this podcast, I don't think, but American Vandal was a Netflix series. Had 2 seasons that was completely a sort of a spoof, a satire on Serial, and every commentary that American Vandal in both seasons makes also applies equally to this. If you haven't watched American Vandal, and you have watched Tiger King or any or listen to Serial, any of that stuff, highly recommend American Vandal. It has a lot of really interesting things to say about sort of the unseen consequences of true crime documentaries and that sort of thing. It's also just really funny. Like, if you just want like an entertaining comedy show, it's a very binge worthy, and while also, at least especially the first season is much better than the second.
First season was way better than the second,
in my opinion. But especially the first season, it's also a very well crafted mystery. Like, it is also entertaining in the way that like Serial or Tiger King is, where it's like these twists and turns every episode and it ends on a cliffhanger every time. So it's the same kind of thing. While also being really funny and a send up of crime dramas and that sort of thing. But so yeah, I thought it was really interesting that they didn't do anything new.
They don't need to, though, because the subject is already so insane, and the people that they've got on there are.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I don't disagree that, like, it is.
Y'all don't need to do anything new with the format.
And I'm sure that's part of what they thought when they sat down and were putting this together, was we don't need, just present it, present it in the way that things like Serial and stuff present. Because I'm also probably on the controversial side, maybe not as much anymore, of the Serial opinion, in that I absolutely think Adnan Syed murdered that girl. Like, I am fairly confident that is the case. Now, I don't necessarily, again, without getting into the details of that, whether or not he should have been convicted, whether or not there's a million other details that go into that, but I think it's pretty unlikely that he wasn't the person responsible.
I've never listened to Serial, so I have zero opinions. Yeah,
and again, that's not a commentary on whether or not he should have been convicted and all these other things, whether or not the trial went the right way, blah, 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 but just in terms of like my objective or subjective opinion on the actual case. Anyways, so that's kind of the general overview of the show. It's nuts. Let's now talk about, because this isn't a conversation I've seen. It happens every now and then, but this isn't something I've seen in response to Tiger King, and it's really weird to me that people aren't. It seems like people have forgotten that documentaries aren't real.
Yeah.
Not that they're not real. Again, the stuff in the show that you see on camera, most of that happened, obviously, because we're watching it happen.
Yeah.
But the feelings and the narratives that are presented to you as a viewer, and the things you come away with, the conclusions you come to, are completely and 100% a result of what the filmmaker decided to do. What the filmmakers in this case decided to show you, how they decided to show you, what order they decided to show you.
It's all in how the narrative is constructed.
Yeah.
And this narrative was constructed very carefully.
Very carefully. And because I will say it's interesting, they do this, they're very good about, I don't want to completely say that the narratives throughout the course of the show were constructed in a way that doesn't reflect reality, because I think it's clear from everything, if you do extra research and stuff, that most of it is, they're not like manufacturing things out of whole cloth. But I think, to me, as I watch the show, and I could, the way they edit things, the shots they decide to put in certain places next to each other, the things they decide to juxtapose with each other in terms of like things that Joe does compared to things that Carol does compared to things that what's his name, Doc Antle does, and sort of again, the way it's so subtle. The power of editing is so strong, and it's so subtle that even things as small as hanging on a shot of a person after they finish talking for a few extra seconds can completely change the way you perceive that what they said. And it may, and that could be real, or that could be completely manufactured. Like, that could be completely false. Like, Carol Baskins could finish a sentence, and if you cut it when she finished a sentence, it sounds like all she said was like, yeah, and this happened, or whatever. But then if you hang there for a few seconds and she doesn't know what's happening, and she smiles strangely because now she finished her thought and the director's just staring at her, or who knows what's happening behind the camera and she's just reacting or not reacting to that, and the camera shot hangs on that, you're now seeing her say this sentence of, I didn't murder my husband, and then she sits there and makes a weird face for 10 seconds, and then they cut it.
Yeah.
And it's things like that. Again, I'm not saying whether or not they did, but there are moments you have to keep all that stuff in mind when you're watching a documentary, that everything you're seeing is what the director wants you to see, is what the filmmakers want you to see.
And then that can work in the opposite kind of direction too. If you have Joe Exotic, he says something and then the camera hangs on him for a few minutes, like you said, but it's just him kind of sitting there in silence. Now he looks introspective, and like he's thinking on things. Yeah, but is he?
Yeah, and it's all. And again, you know, you're seeing what they want you to see. And I think the thing that over the course of the documentary became clear is that the filmmakers saw Joe Exotic as a tragic hero to some extent, who has many flaws but is overall a good person. And they juxtaposed that to, or maybe not overall a good person, but who started as a good person and is basically the protagonist of the story who went astray.
Yeah, I mean, they saw him as a protagonist, but we have to note that protagonist doesn't necessarily mean good guy.
Good guy.
It means main character.
Main character and the person you root for, kind of. And because and then they juxtapose that specifically to Carol Baskins as the person who is the antagonist in the story, but also it's this complicated thing where we'll get to Carol Baskins in a second, but because that's a whole thing for me. But I do think that you just have to keep in mind that the sort of narrative that they present for every character in this story is what they wanted you to see of that person. The elements of Joe Exotic that you saw, and when you saw them in the documentary, you saw them because the filmmakers had already decided he was their protagonist. He was the guy they wanted you to like and root for, but then also thought, but then the fun thing of this is we pull the rug out and turns out he's actually probably tried to get some person killed and is not a great guy and it was abusive and these sort of things. And they present those things, but at this point you already like him. Yeah. They've already twisted you into liking him. And then they kind of do the exact opposite with Carol Baskin's character, where they present her more as like the quote unquote good guy early on, as to an extent, like in the first episode or two, it's she wants to rescue tigers, blah blah blah, and even then they still set up the stepping stones to where they take her their conclusion of her as a person. But so yeah, just keep that in mind when you're watching any documentary, is that you're not seeing the whole thing.
And this one in particular, and I hate to sound elitist, but I probably wouldn't recommend this to anyone that I did not think was going to watch it critically.
I absolutely agree. And it's the reaction that I've seen online, is that people just bought the narrative they were sold.
There's a lack of critical thinking skill, and they bought into the narrative, and now there's free Joe Exotic? Don't free Joe Exotic. He belongs in prison.
He belongs in prison. He's
not a good guy.
He's not a good guy for numerous reasons. And now I will say that I do think that he is a tragic character, in the sense that I think when you see his backstory and what happened to him, you do feel bad for him, and you do to some extent, in the sense that he, his dealing with being a gay man in America, in the South, or in the Midwest in the 80s or whatever, or 70s or whenever he grew up, and trying to kill himself, according to him, when he was a teenager, and never being accepted by his family, and all, just dealing with all that, and that definitely warped his outlook on the world and his relationships, and turned him into the person that he became, obviously. And so he is sympathetic in that sense. Yeah. And I think you should feel sympathy for that, and you should reflect on on everything that happened to a person in their life that led them to become the person that they are. And so in that sense, yes, you should. But at the same time, also, he definitely tried to have Carol Baskins killed, and definitely abused his boyfriends / husbands, and definitely abused animals, well. and all these things, right. And those things definitely occurred. And so I in the sense of I like that narrative of the complicated past that led him to these things. Maybe we should be more sympathetic to everybody's past and what has led them to these things in their life, and maybe be a little more understanding of why they are the way that they are. But here's the thing. The show doesn't do that for everybody. The show does that for Joe Exotic. The show doesn't do that for Doc Antle, but not that we don't know what led him to be the cult leader that he is. And again, none of this is to say that these people shouldn't be in jail or that they shouldn't be. My whole opinions on jail and the correctional system are a whole different bag of worms. But
a tragic backstory is a tragic backstory.
Yeah,
that doesn't excuse the wrongs that you're doing in the present.
It doesn't excuse them, no, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in jail. Because I think, but I mean, maybe not in American jail. You should be in a different type of jail because American jail is useless.
That's a whole thing.
That's a whole thing. Again, that's a whole different thing. But it doesn't excuse. It just it does. But it does explain. But here's the thing: we also don't get any of that. So we present Carol Baskin's story, and when we say, oh well, she murdered her husband and this and that, and blah blah blah. It presents all these things, but we don't get any of the tragic, sad backstory of Carol Baskins, or what we do isn't presented in the same way that it is with Joe Exotic, to where we feel bad for her and her situation.
The presentation of Carol Baskin, we can just transition into that unless there's more that you want.
Well, no, the only other thing I was going to hit on, only other thing I was going to hit on about documentaries was the sort of the exploitation aspect of it, and in particular, it is potentially problematic when it's a bunch of people who are still alive and still going about their lives. And I mean, now most of these people all agreed to be in the documentary, obviously, because they're they agreed to be on camera and stuff, so that is fair. But it is still a complicated and weird topic that I don't think can just be easily swept under the rug as like, well, they agreed to it, so
well, yeah, I mean, if you can't, because of the way that this in particular was edited. I mean, can you imagine agreeing to take part in something like this and then watching it?
Yeah.
Like, let's say as Carol Baskin.
Right. Yeah. Well, she's come out since then and been like,
I would be furious.
Yeah. No, I agree. And so, there is that element of it, because they do not have control over how they are presented.
Yeah.
And again, you can just say, well, they said the words they said, and that's none of this, they're not writing lines for them. It's like, that's not the point. Is the power of editing is super strong, and you have to respect that when you're watching a documentary. And just keep it in mind. Not saying that it means everything you're seeing is like fake, or because obviously not. I think most of the stuff, probably, the vast majority of what is presented in this documentary is mostly accurate.
It's Theo Razzle Dazzle.
Yeah.
You can have something that is at its core true, but it's all in presentation.
Yeah.
And the way that it is presented can be geared towards making you think and or feel a certain way about it.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, that is 100% what happened here.
Yeah. So let's get to the next topic, and that is Carol Baskin specifically. So Carol Baskin is now the most hated woman in America, maybe, currently.
I mean, it's a tough race.
It's a tough race. Her and Hillary are like, poof. But it is, so she's, I mean, and the memes are nonstop, and everybody, it's just nonstop sort of, I mean, I've seen constant posts on Reddit of people like, honk if you hate Carol or honk if you hate that bitch Carol Baskin, and blah, 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 like people out on their lawn with signs that, and again, it's a small number of people in the overall society, but it is this sort of cultural meme now. And I mean, I've said, I don't know if I specifically said it, but I very much think she probably did not murder her husband.
Oh,
probably did not.
I don't think she murdered her husband.
Probably not.
I think, spoilers, I guess.
Yeah.
I think he probably took his little plane that he didn't have proper licensing for, just like a man, out over the ocean and flew it into the ocean.
Yeah. The other thing I've seen in speculation is that because they were going back and forth between Central American stuff, that potentially they were involved in some sort of drug trade situation.
Yeah, that's totally
and that
possible.
somebody, he owed some money or something, and they came and
of course she's not going to talk about
and,
that.
Yeah, and of course she's not going to talk about that because it would implicate her. And so I will say that I don't think she is also a little bit of a character and not like all there and grounded. You know what I mean? I think the presentation of what we get of her as a person isn't completely inaccurate in the show, in the sense that I don't think she's like, I
mean, anyone who builds their entire wardrobe on just animal print is a little kooky.
I think she's she's a little kooky at best. And also there's been some other reporting that I've seen, and I haven't done a ton of research about some of the stuff with the actual foundation, the Big Cat whatever rescue, about them sort of not being completely truthful about where they got all their cats and her. And I think it is the situation where
I've seen conflicting reports about her facility.
Yeah, I think that's a complicated question. I will say that I think that it was confusing to me in the show that they present her opinion on these animals as somehow on cat sanctuaries as somehow hypocritical, because she owns a cat sanctuary and runs one, but is trying to shut down these cat zoos. And to me, I didn't understand what the hypocrisy was, because they very clearly stated a bunch. And now she had at different times throughout her life had been part of breeding cats and done things, and she openly admits that throughout the documentary and in other extraneous sources, admits that she was part of the cat trade and was exploiting cats in her when she was younger, and that now she doesn't want to do that anymore and sees that as a problem, and that the fact that she runs a cat sanctuary isn't
not equal to participating in the illegal big cat trade.
Yeah, it's not the same thing, and the documentary tries to equate them, and it's not remotely the same thing. Like, cat sanctuaries can be a thing. And that's what they tried to say, and that's what she presents throughout the show, is that we're people, like, when they have their cats and then realize they don't want them anymore, instead of just having them put down,
and they can't go back to the wild.
They can't go back in the wild.
That's not reality.
So they got to go somewhere. So we take them here until they die, and we try to provide as humane a situation,
as good of a life as can be for a cat in captivity.
Yeah, and now you can get into the nitty gritty details of whether or not they did a good job of that. But I think that was at least that was obviously her stated goal, and I don't know how people are conflicting that with being the same thing as what the like for-profit zoos are doing. And that's even disregarding whether or not you think any of that's okay or not.
Yeah.
It's just like they're not the same thing, and they weren't. I don't know. I found that whole thing very strange. But so everybody thinks she's a murderer, and then so everybody hates her because everybody thinks she murdered her husband. And the thing that I find wild about this, and I think there's a lot, and I think there's a lot of inherent sexism in this whole thing.
The misogyny was real.
Yeah, the misogyny is real, and there's a lot of elements to this whole documentary that we'll get to even more in a second that are problematic at best. But I think there's this very clear inherent misogyny, and it's sort of reflective of somebody like Hillary Clinton, where we have the suspicion presented by filmmakers that maybe, and people who hate her because she wants to shut down their business, that this woman maybe killed her husband who disappeared.
Yeah.
And every single person in the United States now believes that.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. We have this presentation of this woman maybe possibly did something wrong. And now everybody just buys it.
Everybody hates her for it.
Yeah.
And everybody has signs about how horrible she is and how she's this giant bitch, and everybody hates her. Meanwhile, we literally know, because the documentary presented it to us, that Joe Exotic did all kinds of horrible shit.
Yeah.
And guess what? Everybody fucking loves him.
Yeah.
And now, it's not just sexism. There's a big component of charisma in that. And there's a huge component of it. I'm not discounting that it's purely... Obviously, nothing's purely down to any one factor. But, I mean, that, like, what... And it reminds me of that same thing with like Trump and Hillary, where it's like, you know, the speculation of what maybe Hillary might have done versus what we absolutely have Donald Trump admitting to on camera. And we're like, like, not we, but like as a country, we just like shrug our shoulders
as a collective whole
and chant lock her up.
We would rather crucify the woman for a maybe crime than the man for a crime that he openly admitted to committing. And guess what, people? That's misogyny.
Yeah. And
that's what it is.
Yeah. I just want everybody to reflect on that a little bit after watching the documentary or as you watch the documentary. Just try to think about that a little bit. Again, it's not an entire indictment of you as a person, obviously, because it's easy to get kind of pulled in by those narratives. And again, it's not just that, because like I said, she's not particularly charismatic in the same way that she is in ways, but not in the same way that like Joe Exotic.
She's not fun to watch.
She's not fun to watch and entertaining in the same way. But part of the reason that might be is because she is fun in her own way. She's a zany cat lady. Like, there is a charm to her.
She's like a middle school art teacher kind of fun.
There is a charm to her, but it is a different thing. It's a different charisma. And I also think it's interesting to reflect on why one of those things is more interesting and more like palatable endearing and palatable to us than the other thing is. Again, these are all those things to kind of reflect on as you think about this documentary and how you viewed the people in it. Because that's one of the things that's been blowing my mind about the reaction to it. I'm like literally have been Googling like, am I the only person in this country who like?
I'm not even slightly surprised by that reaction.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I guess I am a little surprised, but I shouldn't be.
I'm disappointed, but not surprised over here.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I guess I was a little bit because it's so obvious to me. And now it helps that I know how filmmaking works, and so I know when I'm being manipulated. At least sometimes I'm not perfect in it, but like I can tell, a little bit when I'm being manipulated. And I think one thing I wanted to bring up a specific example of. To sort of express what we're talking about in terms of the editing and the presentation in the comparison of these people. And one of the examples that stuck out to me that we talked about was, so they present Doc Antle and his harem of clearly groomed wives that he keeps. And again, now I say harem, and this is a topic we'll get into here in a second, is the presentation of alternative lifestyles and that sort of thing. Because I'm all for like polyamory. Go get them. Big kudos for you.
But not if you are Stockholming people.
Not if you're Stockholming people. Not if you're bringing them in as teenagers, breeding them, and indoctrinating them into a weird cult. Don't do that. But I just didn't want to I wanted to make it clear when I was using words like harem and stuff that I'm not like, sullying the whole idea of polyamory and that sort of thing. Polygamy, but my point being that, so we see the documentary in the second episode, I think it is, presents his whole story and his wives and all these things that are going on, and sets it up and very much shows like, this guy's a creep. This guy is abusing.
Oh, he should be in jail.
He should also be in jail, which they talk about later on that for numerous things, but none less so than the fact that he brings teenagers in. They openly admits it, says they were teenagers when they showed up, and then grooms them into becoming his wives / girlfriends, whatever. And so absolutely predatory and horrifying. And it presents all that, and they talk about how he chooses what they wear. Like, they have to wear the clothes he wants them to wear, and this and that, and they go through certain initiation and blah 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 and all these different things, and they got to do this and that, and then immediately juxtapose and cut over to Carol Baskins at Big Cat Rescue, and the documentary tells us about how she has all these volunteers that she doesn't pay.
Yeah, because they're volunteers.
Because that's what volunteers fucking are. Like, at first, that was the first thing where I was like, you guys know that charities have volunteers, right?
That's how charities work.
That's how charities work. And now I get, you can, if you want to go into the financials of her charity and say that she's profiting obscenely from it and blah, 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 sure, fine. The documentary doesn't go into that. Like, so I don't know. But charities having volunteers, and it is, I believe, a 501c3. I think they say at one point in the documentary, it's a charity. Them having volunteers is
totally normal.
Totally normal.
Totally normal, you guys.
And they're like, she manipulates people into working for her for free. And I'm like, no, that's what... okay, sure, fine, whatever. There's a difference between for-profit companies and charities, but sure. Again, we can... But, so that was the first thing. And I was like, oh, okay. But they present that like they're equivalent. Then they start talking about how these volunteers wear color-coded shirts for how long they've volunteered and what level of like experience they have. Mm-hmm. And the documentary very clearly presents this as reflective of the cult-like behavior of Doc Antle's tiger farm, whatever, zoo, and then jumps over to this charity and goes, see, like, no, the documentary never says this. This is where they get you, because you could be like, well, the documentary never says they're the same thing. It's like, no.
The way that they present it makes you think that it's the same thing.
And you're like, oh, man, that is like a cult. Because all of a sudden now she's like, well, these people wear green shirts when they start, and then for the first 2 years, you're a green shirt, and then after you have 2 years experience, you come and get a blue shirt, and then blah, 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 moving up.
So the narrative presents those two things as equal.
As equivalent, yes.
Equivalent.
And again, they never say that, but they present it that way. And if you don't think about it too closely in your head, you're like, man, they're the same. She's also running a cult, clearly.
Yeah, except that's the way that volunteering at a large charity works.
If that's a cult thing, guess what? Like every kid's summer camp is a cult, because like the different camp counselors have different colored shirts for how, like, the leadership has green shirts and the art teachers have red shirt, or what, you know what I mean? Like, that's how organizations work a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like, not all the time, but a lot of the time.
A lot of the time, and especially with something like a tiger sanctuary, a big cat sanctuary, you definitely want something where you can easily denote how much experience someone has.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Sure. It makes perfect sense. And especially because at a glance then, if you see somebody in the wrong color shirt doing something too dangerous for them, you can go, hey, don't do that. You don't have the experience to do that. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like I'm a crazy person when I'm watching this, and that people aren't seeing how obvious this manipulation is. And it's wild to me. And it just blew my mind. How people seem to, again, based on the sort of general internet perception, to fall for it hook, line, and sinker. Mm-hmm. And I'm just astounded. I shouldn't be, but it's really wild to me. Yeah, it's fucking weird. Another place where the editing really jumped out at me, in regards to how Carol Baskin was portrayed. Yeah. At close to the very end of the series, I don't remember if it was the last episode or not, but when they are reading Joe Exotic's sentence, when they find him guilty, and they're reading the charges, and they do that, they put that sound clip of reading the charges to an image of Carol Baskin putting on lipstick. Yeah. Yeah. For why? Because she's a calculating evil bitch, Katie. That's why. Because that's what that image tells us. That is exactly what that image tells us. That's femme fatale footage. 100%. Did Carol Baskin put him in jail? No. A jury of his peers put him in jail. For trying to kill Carol Baskin. Among other things. But the show chooses to put that sound clip and that image together. Yeah. And that was a calculated choice. Very specific. Those are the things that you have to think about when you're watching media like this. Yeah. That was a calculated choice. They chose to do that because they knew that it would get a particular reaction from people and that it would make them think a certain thing. Absolutely. It is. Yeah, and there's it happens a ton throughout the whole course of the documentary. It's not remotely just, those few examples. It's constant. And it's pretty wild. Anyways, I could go on for hours about Carol Baskin because, again, I don't even know. She may not even be a great person, but she might not be. But I feel like fairly safe saying that she was portrayed unfairly by this documentary. Yes, she may be a terrible person, But the reason, but the documentary completely went about showing, like the way they went about, completely. I'm just saying what you said, completely portrayed completely unfairly throughout the course of the documentary, and in a way that was very intentional.
Yeah.
All right, final topic that we wanted to talk about is the portrayal of LGBTQ people in. LGBTQ plus people,
which has
we've got to include the plus because there's no P in there, but
which has gotten even more interesting post watch.
Oh yeah, for sure. We already had thoughts about it while we were watching it, but more things have come out since then. And we were both read an article the other day about one of the people that is in the documentary. But there's lots of things. The one I already mentioned, which we'll just touch on briefly because it's not as much of a topic, is but I mentioned this while we were watching it, is it felt like a very so Doc Antle and Joe Exotic to an extent, and their polyamorous relationships. The documentary feels very judgmental on, and now both of them are predators.
Yeah. And
so both of them should be judged for their predatory behavior, but the documentary presents it as not that them specifically, but also that the general idea of having multiple partners is inherently predatory, which I think is the vibe I get from the documentary.
I get that vibe. I think this is also wrapped up in sexual orientation, though, because I think the documentary presents Joe as more predatory or worse than it. I think they frame him worse than they do Doc Antle.
I don't know about that. I think there's an added layer of bad with his because they imply that he's like turning straight men gay. Like there's that extra layer of weirdness with his. But I think the documentary does lean pretty hard into the predatory nature of Doc Antle. It's like the whole second episode
I think they lean hard into it, but I think it was all kind of contained to that one episode.
Yeah,
I think is my point. Whereas Joe Exotic's behavior was touched on way more.
Yeah. Also, I will say this, that the predatory behavior of Doc Antle is, and it is partially because of the people that are talking about it, but it is constantly sort of laughed off in I think because of the heteronormativity of it, it's constantly laughed off in a like, haha, don't we all wish we could just fuck lots of pretty women way?
Yeah.
Like, he's got it good.
Haha, he's got 5 girlfriends.
Like, everybody, and now mostly it's always the people, it's the documentary, the filmmakers never speak.
Yeah.
Don't actually physically speak. They speak through the people by what they choose to show, what they choose to show us in the episodes. But, so it's lots of the people being like, sort of laughing off the weird predatory nature of what he's doing.
I don't think that the documentary necessarily excused his behavior, but I do think they couched it in heteronormativity.
Yeah, and I will agree with that. That I think that because of how much they showed people sort of like chuckling about, ooh, that he's got it all figured out kind of thing, was like, sort of made you feel less weird about it. Like, it was the implication that you get is like, people, oh, look, everybody's just kind of, it's just he's the way he does, like that's just how, like it does feel like a little less sinister, potentially. Even though, again, I think they kind of do both. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Let's get to Joe Exotic and his husbands. Yeah. Which they're 2 over the course of the show. Well, 3.
3, yeah.
And one of the things that we had we had both thought of as we were watching the show, but is another thing that people are bringing up more lately, is that the documentary goes to great lengths over the course of the first few episodes to set them up as husbands, as lovers, as boyfriends, that him and his gay husbands. And then towards the end of the series, the documentary shifts very abruptly to the fact that all of these people saying, well, they were never gay, his husbands. They're not gay. They're straight. And like, there's another option, right? Like, people aren't just gay and straight. And the documentary does not know, or specifically, the people don't talk about it, and the documentary never continues to show people only saying that they were obviously straight and that Joe was like manipulating them into being gay, basically. And it is absolutely an erasure of bisexuality in a very problematic way.
It's an erasure of bisexuality, and I also think that it's very telling that out of various examples of LGBT plus people and alternative lifestyles that we kind of have presented here, that what the show chooses to primarily focus on is Joe Exotic's sexuality. And the way that they choose to view it is through a predatory lens.
Yes.
Because Joe Exotic is a predator. Absolutely is a predator. But he's not a predator because he's gay.
No.
But that's the way that the show presents it.
Yeah. Not because he's gay or because he's polyamorous or any of those reasons. He's a predator because he's a predator, and those things just happen to be the case also. But it is very much through the lens of the show. And
that is really why it bothers me that the show continues to go back to that over somebody like Doc Antle, whose very predatory behavior gets so couched in heteronormativity, and then Joe's predatory behavior is viewed through the lens of his homosexuality. It's incredibly problematic.
Yeah, it really is. And so nobody in the show ever addresses the idea that maybe, just maybe, his husbands like men and women. Or maybe, and no, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe they don't.
Maybe they don't. And maybe they were literally just straight and sleeping with him for drugs, etc.
Yeah.
But there's never once even the semblance of an entertainment of the idea that maybe they like men, women, whatever. Maybe they're, maybe their gender isn't an important factor in what they're attracted to. Who knows? And now part of the reason for that is because we're dealing with people from very conservative areas of the country who don't have that sort of who probably don't have that sort of expansive view on sexuality and gender and those sort of things.
And might not have the vocabulary to even discuss it.
Right. So that's fair. And I'm not saying that, but at the same time, the documentary continuously presents that same narrative over and over again. And it is, it's very unfortunate. And then the final thing on this, I think the final thing on this topic is I've been talking to people about this at work and stuff. And I was like, there's two sane people in this whole show. And I say sane, I don't mean that to be neurotypical. When I say sane versus insane, I'm using it in a very not clinical way. Really, I mean that in when and again, maybe there are better words for it. That's just how I always say it, or kind of describe things as insane versus. And again, I know that that's maybe not necessarily the best way to talk about this, but there's two sane people in the whole show, and that is Saf, the zookeeper, and Emily something, the FBI agent, who's in an episode at the end of the series. It's everybody else is some level of bonkers. And that's fine because most people are some level of bonkers. Again, but specifically talking about Saf, this is something the show never addresses at all. But I thought it was interesting, and we'll get to this. But apparently, Saf identifies as male, is transgender. Identifies as male, and their documentary throughout the entire course of the documentary refers to Saf as she and her, and all the people in the show do. And that is not the case in the show, or the documentary never addresses it at all. Never mentions it. Never does anything. I will say I thought this was interesting, is that whoever called when Saf got his arm bit off. Whoever called 911 said a man got his arm bit off. They referred to Saf as he. Yeah. Whoever made that 911 call. And I thought that was interesting because I remember that stuck out in my head at the time, and I didn't at the time watching the show didn't know how Saf identified. So and the documentary routinely referred to Saf as she. So in my head it was she, and I was like, oh, they said he on the phone. That's weird. Maybe they didn't know who it was or something. You know what I mean? But I was like, oh, now looking back, it's like maybe the person who called 911 did know and did actually correctly gender this person. And it is weird.
And I mean, as far as the people featured in the documentary, I mean, who knows how they felt about it and referred to him. Who knows?
Yeah.
I did read, I think it was in that article, that now after the fact, the show has kind of made an excuse that like a lot of the newsreel footage at the time and that type of thing was misgendering Saf, and they were like, oh, that made it complicated, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah. I think they could have handled it better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they could have figured out a way to handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that because it is, it's not tough. They could have just made different decisions overall. But the documentary never does chime in.
Yeah.
There aren't title cards. There aren't like, at least from my memory,
there
right?
There are titles of episodes.
There are title cards, but there aren't like, the text doesn't come up and say, blank,
there's
blank,
never
blank,
like
blank.
Clarifying text.
Yeah, there's not like text on screens.
And they absolutely could have done that. They could have had some kind of note or addendum in there, like acknowledging Saf's
gender identity. Yeah, but also acknowledging that throughout the course of this series, people will call him she and blah blah blah, and so don't get confused. They're talking about this person, but they could have and they didn't. Yeah. So, but
could have done a lot of things.
Could have done a lot of things, and could have not done a lot of things.
Yep.
Was there anything else?
A couple other random things that I just wanted to get off my chest.
Yeah.
Doc Antle.
Yep.
Sent chills up my spine.
Yeah, horrifying. Horrifying human being.
Horrifying human being, ought to be in jail.
Yes.
Should not be in society interacting with anyone, in my opinion. And I have a lot of, and I also have a lot of thoughts on the prison system and don't agree with it. But a person like that should not be in society and interacting with people, in my opinion.
No, that's not my opinion. Isn't that they should be. My opinion is that they shouldn't be. My opinion is that the prison system is a nightmare and needs to be completely changed.
It absolutely is.
But absolutely, you have to remove people from society.
There was one thing that I was absolutely aghast at, and I was horrified that this show did not. It's part of the reason that it really just bothers me so much that all of his behavior, his predatory behavior, was contained to that one episode, and everything else was more just like, ooh, the kooky tiger guy.
Yeah, with the wives.
When they were talking to, I don't remember her name, the woman who left.
Who left, yeah. I can't remember her name either, but yeah.
And she was talking about getting breast implants while she was there. And she said, I don't remember the exact quote. She said something to the effect of like, I don't remember agreeing to that. But at that point, I was so tired, I would have agreed to anything to be able to rest.
Yeah. And
here's the thing. That's literally how you give someone Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
Is that you deprive them of rest and of nutrition until they will agree to anything.
Yeah, and of normalcy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. And that absolutely sent chills up my spine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's horrifying. It's horrifying. It's truly horrifying. And yeah, absolutely. And it seems likely now, given the publicity, because again, I don't think he comes out good over the course of the show.
I think overall he does not.
And so I think it's very likely that I don't want to say it's very likely, but I wouldn't be surprised if something came of, there were investigations, blah, 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 some sort of stuff started happening on his end. And hopefully it does, because it's definitely no, but we're all too busy. Don't worry. Didn't you hear that the sheriff's looking into Carol Baskin to see if she actually murdered her husband 8 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever?
You know what? if she did murder her husband, even if she did, nothing but respect for that game. I don't even care.
I mean,
good for her.
Nah. I mean, I don't know. I don't remember the movie implying any sort of abuse, but if there was, then maybe. But otherwise, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say, good job murdering your husband. Again, I don't know the nature of their relationship. Maybe it was who knows if she did. I don't know. I'm just saying that in general. I know you're memeing, but send help.
Last thing.
Yeah.
The FBI agent, Amanda.
I thought it was Emily, but it's either Emily or Amanda.
Emily or Amanda, the FBI agent. Loved her.
She was great.
I got this sense watching this that the takedown of Joe Exotic was cathartic.
Oh yeah,
for her of maybe wanting to take down somebody else kind of similar to Joe Exotic, who's really powerful.
Yeah. Yes.
Kind of got that sense a little bit.
A little bit. She was giving off strong. Yeah. She made me feel things, that's all I'll say.
Powerful vibes. Powerful
vibes is a good way to describe it without getting into details. She was giving off powerful vibes. But yeah, I liked her. I don't know. I don't have anything else. I don't have
anything else to add.
Cool. So yeah, that's our thoughts on Tiger King.
It was a train wreck. If you have watched it, please reflect on it.
Yeah,
and
just
try to think
yeah.
about it. If you haven't watched it and you think maybe I will, please
keep that stuff in mind.
Please keep that stuff in mind and just go into it with your critical thinking hat on.
Yeah. And your guard up in terms of not buying everything that you're sold.
Yeah.
By the
don't leave yourself completely open to the narrative.
Yeah, because it's easy, and it's not that it's like you're dumb or weak or whatever if you fall for it. It's easy to be sucked in.
It's easy, especially with as much media as is out there right now. It's easy to just passively consume.
Yeah,
but you really shouldn't passively consume anything,
especially not things that are real.
Yeah, and
like documentaries
things that are presented as being the truth.
Yeah, things that are presented as being the truth, you shouldn't passively consume. It's one thing to passively consume, like a
sitcom.
A sitcom. Even then, you shouldn't. But I mean, you know, we're we get it. Like you sometimes just want to turn your brain off.
Sometimes
and watch
you
TV.
want to turn your brain off. We understand, but definitely something like a documentary, and especially a documentary that is about people.
Yeah.
And especially a documentary that's about people that are still alive. Mm-hmm.
Just
please don't passively consume this.
Yeah. Think about it a little bit and go in critically and feel free to meme on it, but just think about what your memes are contributing to society at large. Because I'm real done with the bitch Carol Baskin memes. Like, I'm just real done with them.
There are people that in my Facebook feed that I've lost additional respect for.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's not that I don't think that they're intentionally being misogynistic. I think it's just you get caught up in the narrative and you don't really think too critically about it, and then you're like, yeah, she seemed kind of like a bitch.
Yeah.
And it's fun because Joe Exotic's fun, and he made that funny song about her, and he found the person who looked exactly like her to be in his music video, which that was incredible. But it is, it's a whole thing. This is a real. I will say that the whole experience of the thing has been a really window into society. Mm-hmm. and a reminder again of things that, like I said, when you're like, oh, I wasn't surprised by how everybody reacted to Carol Baskins. It was a bit of a reminder to me of how screwed we all are.
Yeah. And I do wonder if this would be making as big of a splash as it is if we weren't all currently
that's a big part of it,
bored and also looking to escape.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I mean, it would still be making a big splash, but
yeah, I think it would.
Not the same. Maybe not the same level.
Height. Yeah.
No, it definitely wouldn't, because it's. I read some statistics the other day that streaming content is up like 15% since the sort of isolating thing has started. So like it's just a lot more people are streaming and watching and that sort of thing. So yeah, it still would have been a big thing, but probably not quite as big. Or that's it. If you listened all the way to the end, thank you for supporting us on Patreon. We're gonna record another episode here very shortly, and we'll just tell you what we're gonna talk about now. We teased it in the Hidden Figures episode, but we just finished New Girl. Mm-hmm. And kind of we're done watching, I'll say, a show called Lost Girl. We're done watching it. That doesn't imply anything. Don't want to spoil our feelings. So we're gonna do a new Lost Girl episode, a Lost New Girl episode, one of the whatever it'll be called. But we're gonna discuss both those shows to some extent in another Patron-only exclusive episode. Probably a lot of people have seen New Girl. Probably not a lot of people have seen Lost Girl, but some. I say a lot. There's like 20 patrons, so odds are like a few of you have seen Lost Girl, and probably half of you have seen New Girl, would be my guess, in that ballpark figure. So yeah, we're gonna talk about those two shows. That's it. That's what we're gonna do. So hopefully that you find that interesting.
That's what we're planning on. I'm sure over the next month or so we'll be consuming a lot of content.
Yeah, no, there will be more. I'm just saying that was the next one we're gonna do sometime in the next few days, and it'll be out in a couple weeks or something, because we wrapped up both of those shows recently. So until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else,
keep reading books.
Oh yeah, do we normally do that?
I don't know. I don't remember.
I don't remember either. Stay inside. Stay safe. And stay sane.
Yeah.
Carol Baskins didn't kill her husband.
Definitely not.
Or it's like a very small percentage chance that she killed her.
It's like maybe a 5% chance.
Like a 5 to 10% chance.
She probably didn't.
Probably didn't.
Consume media responsibly.
There you go. That's a good